Hey, we're Flick and Joe, and this is our dog Walter. In 2022, we made the crazy decision to quit our full-time jobs, pack up our lives, and move aboard our blue water sailing boat. We spent many months refitting her and getting her ready for our plans until one day we actually did it. We cast off the lines, we pointed her south, and off we went. We've now sailed over 1,000 nautical miles, dodging orcas, yes, actually, and most of the rocks along the way. Join us for the beautiful, quite stressful but endlessly eventful life that is full-time living aboard.
People love to tout that they bought an old boat on the cheap. You see popular YouTube videos where boats have been bought for $1, and it draws people in. The romance is very real. Buying an old boat can be cheap, it's easy to do, and you could be up and running, sailing the world in no time, right? I think it is, for the most part, a fallacy. I suppose this video sort of aims to take the wind out of the sails of this somewhat glorified YouTube internet truth. Buying an old boat is hard work, and guess what? It's expensive. I think buying an old boat is a bit of a lottery.
My mom always said life was like a box of chocolates.
And I've come up with 5 main reasons why you should not buy an old boat. I'm keen to see what you guys think. Do you have an old boat? Do you have a newer boat? Have you had both? And do you notice the difference between the two? Or is there just one incontrovertible truth? Boats break, it doesn't matter how old it is, boats are always expensive and always hard work. After all, BOAT stands for Break Out Another 1,000. So with that being said, let's get to it. They are old. Nendaz is a 34-year-old boat. A lot of our big ticket items, various bits of deck hardware, are towards the end of their usable life now. They're a bit old and battered. Depending on the boat, things like booms, masts, deck fittings, winches, sails, standing rigging, windlasses and furler units are all a little rough around the edges. And chances are that some of the manufacturers don't even exist anymore. They've been bought out or they've gone bust, and even if they do exist, any replacement parts were probably discontinued some time ago. You might be able to find a third party who sells parts for old boat hardware, but they will charge an arm and a leg for it because they know that the only alternative is to buy an entirely new unit, which is even more expensive. Guess what? You have rot somewhere on your boat. If you think you don't, it's just because you haven't found it yet. It is an inevitability. There will be rot somewhere in the balsa cord deck and probably somewhere in a bulkhead. The classic place is in the head, where water gets underneath the plastic shelled walls or floor of the head and then gets trapped and it rots the bottom of your bulkhead. We had rot in all of these places and more, and we also had trouble with rot in the anchor locker structure that supports the windlass. Other items like steel water tanks and diesel tanks may also be towards the back end of their life. The steel does eventually corrode or rust, especially in the corners around the welds. And how feasible is it to physically remove your diesel tank? It may well have been built into the boat, and how will you put a new one of the same size in its place? Let's talk about horsepower. The engine is an important part of any sailboat, and in an old boat, it's probably reaching the end of its life at this point, and it's a big ticket item to replace. It's not cheap. You are in most cases looking at 5-figure sums. It all depends on how well the engine has been looked after. Age is not the only factor here, but this brings us onto our next point. Do you know the history of your boat? How well has it really been looked after? Has that engine been fed with clean oil on a regular basis? Has it been run hard every now and again like they need to? And is the coolant loop full of limescale or rust? When was the last time some of the shorter lifespan parts of the engine were replaced? Has it had a new starter motor, a coolant pump, fuel injection pump, fuel lift pump, or alternator? Has it ever had a top-end service? You could have 20 years of meticulous ownership and maintenance to have it all unwound in a year or two by one neglectful owner, a lifetime of care can be unwound in no time at all. Has the boat ever been grounded? Has the boat had poor quality repairs done to it and then painted over or hidden, only to rear their ugly head a couple years later under a new owner? And what was the boat used for in the past? Was it a charter boat that's been ragged around the Mediterranean or the Caribbean?
Pull up the anchor 'cause we're leaving dry land. Get below deck with a in your hand.
Or has it sat in a marina for a number of years and only ever gone for short sails at the weekend? Has it been sailed around the world? In my opinion, there's two trains of thought here. Sure, the boat has sailed around the world, but does that mean everything has been worked really hard and there's less usable life in all of the deck hardware compared to the boat that's sat in the marina and been out for occasional weekend sails? The round-the-world boat will have used its windlass day in, day out for years, but it may be really worn. Whereas the weekend sailor may never have even been at anchor, and it's as good as new. But is any of this relevant? Because if none of this hardware has been serviced on a regular basis, then it doesn't necessarily matter how much it's been used. I guess my point is, just be prepared to spend some money on your boat. You're not going to buy a boat for $1 and immediately start sailing it around the world. And I don't think many people truly believe that that is possible. If you want to keep your costs to a minimum, then you need to understand that you will have to become an electrician, a diesel mechanic, a plumber, a rigger, and just an all-round shipwright generalist. Doing this will enable you to save a small fortune on labour costs, but you will still have to buy those raw materials, and everything in the marine world is expensive. Be prepared to think outside the box. Is this really a marine product? Does it need to be? Or could you just purchase it from a DIY store for half the price? It might take more time doing it yourself, but you will gain invaluable knowledge about your own boat, its systems, and how to repair them wherever you are in the world. And it's so much more rewarding. You might just end up doing a better job than a tradesman anyway. As a rule of thumb, the maximum speed of a cruising sailboat, commonly called the hull speed, is governed by a simple formula. Hull speed in knots equals 1.34 multiplied by the square root of the waterline length in feet. The design of older boats lend themselves to a shorter waterline length when compared to the modern generation of cruising yachts. Old sailboats are slow. Of course, there are exceptions, but as a general rule of thumb, the older boats are slower. Nendaz is a 1989 40-foot gypsy with a waterline length of 32 foot, so an 8-foot difference, whereas a 40-foot Allures 2019 model has a waterline length of 37 foot, 3-foot difference. As a result, the modern boat has a higher hull speed, 7.6 knots for Nendaz versus 8.2 knots for the Allures. But how does this manifest itself in real life though? Well, combine the above with the fact that an old boat will typically have old sails that will have somewhat lost their shape and are possibly made with old sail design and technology in terms of the fabric itself and the stitch pattern, and probably a smaller suite of sails to choose from. You can end up with a boat that's quite a bit slower. But why does it matter? Well, it doesn't really, but if you don't care about boat speed, then all of this chapter is irrelevant to you. But let me leave you with this. Crossing the Atlantic is a 2,500 nautical mile journey. Two boats cross, one does 5 knot average, the other 5.5 knot average. The second boat will reach the Caribbean 25 hours earlier. The quicker boat can also dodge storms and the doldrums easier, which can in fact compound, meaning the slower boat is probably even slower as it gets stuck in the doldrums, and then later has to heave to in awful weather as the storm caught up with it. Meanwhile, the quicker boat are sat in the Caribbean enjoying their cocktails. As a side note, apart from looking very pretty, the large overhanging sterns and bows were built for speed reasons. The design was originally used to cheat racing handicap rules. because on paper, a boat may have a short waterline length of say 32 feet, but is in fact a 45-foot boat with a chunky, overhanging stern and a bow to match. But as soon as that boat starts to heel over, that overhang goes into the water, therefore extending the waterline length, making your boat quick, but while still being classified in the handicap rules as a slower boat. There tends to be less space inside an old boat. They tend to go from the bow, bellowing out at the midship, and then shrinking back in again at the stern. Whereas modern boats have a totally different profile. Often the stern is the same width as the beam, or marginally smaller. In addition to this, the shorter waterline length usually means there's less usable space in both the stern and the bow when compared to newer boats. That big overhanging stern means you lose usable head height very quickly. What this means is modern boats tend to have much bigger and wider cockpits, with more space down below too. This is really noticeable, especially in older centre cockpit boats. Insurance companies may not insure boats over a certain age, regardless of the material they're made of or how well refitted/maintained they are. There are many factors at play here, and I am by no means an insurance expert, so maybe someone can shed some light on the industry. Please feel free to hit us up in the comments. We personally found it particularly hard to get insurance for crossing the Atlantic, which is something we were originally planning on doing. It seems that insurance companies won't insure you if boat value is below a certain amount, especially for ocean crossings. My guess is that they believe that your boat, as it is of a lesser monetary value, you'll have less incentive to try and save the boat, and I think it's to try and stop people buying a cheap boat, trying to cross an ocean and failing, and then cashing in on the insurance premium to then go and buy another cheap boat, rinse repeat. It's a bit of a strange one because as full-time liveaboards, I believe we would try a lot harder than a non-liveaboard to try and save our boat. We have a lot of personal belongings on this boat, and it's not just the monetary value of the belongings, but it's the sentimental value. This is our home, and we would do anything we can to protect it. Just because an old boat is cheap in the grand scheme of boat prices, it doesn't mean it's cheap for you. You end up locking away a big chunk of money when you buy a boat, and it's all relative, isn't it? We saved for years for our old boat, and it really wouldn't sit comfortable with me knowing that it wasn't insured. And if the worst did happen, we've lost all those years of life savings. So, what have we learned from this video? Old boats are exactly that. They are old. They may have had many owners, some more loving than others. They are slow, not very spacious, and you might just struggle to insure it.
But we have an old boat and we love her.
Well, Flick, yes. Yes, we do. I guess I just want to say, don't be fooled by those $1 boat purchase videos on YouTube, because the reality is that they will be storing that boat for years, spending thousands of dollars in refit costs, haul-out fees, yard fees, and marina fees. Sometimes that $1 boat may end up costing more than it would have cost to buy a $30,000 boat that's ready to set sail immediately. And in some cases, the dream sadly will die, the boat will never leave the yard, and the boat will be passed on to the next $1 owner. I really just want to highlight that old sailboats are hard work. A lot of hard work. There is a never-ending list of things to fix, and it all costs a lot of money. But if you enjoy fixing things, learning on the go, as I do, then it's really not that bad. In fact, I love fixing things. I've spent years sat in an office in various accountancy and finance roles, and it's so refreshing to be doing things with my hands, like problem-solving things that break. And it's incredibly rewarding to fix something for, let's say, $100 rather than buy an entirely new unit for thousands. I love it, and I get to do all of this while sailing to some amazing places, living as sustainably as we can, no one's perfect, and meeting some incredible people along the way. Buying an old boat is the most accessible way to get into this world of sailing and full-time cruising. Assuming you do a lot of the work yourself, it is ultimately cheaper to buy an old boat and refit it yourself. The alternative is buying a newer, more modern cruiser, which ends up being a lot more expensive. Buying the old boat is cheaper, but that does not mean buying the old boat is cheap. Let us know what you thought of this video. Do you agree with some of my points, or do you just think I'm talking nonsense? If you enjoyed the content and want to follow along in our adventures, hit that subscribe button. We aim to launch a new video every week. Until then, goodbye.